Hi everyone, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. I'm really happy you're here. Tonight, we're going to go on a calm and quiet trip to learn something amazing. So get comfy, take a deep breath, and let's enjoy this peaceful science story together. Before we start, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? If you like relaxing science videos, don't forget to tap the like button. Now let's begin.
Far above our heads, beyond the reach of any breath or breeze, a giant sphere of fire hums in silence. It has no north or south like a compass on Earth. But still, somewhere at its mysterious bottom, beneath the glowing crown that burns unseen from most eyes, the sun holds secrets in its southern pole, secrets wrapped in currents of light and shadow, swirling like wind through a sky no one has ever stood beneath. We have looked at the sun for centuries, but we've only just begun to glance at its underbelly. And as the new eyes of space turn their gaze downward, what they see is not emptiness. It is motion. It is memory. It is the wind beneath the crown. Imagine standing in a place where there is no ground, no air, no sky, just light. A light so ancient it remembers the dawn of our world. A light born from nuclear dances deep inside, pushing outward in every direction until it escapes, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, across the surface of the sun and into the arms of space. But not all this light is calm. Some of it boils, some of it twists. And at the sun's poles, especially the southern one, it spirals in strange, unseen ways, like dancers caught in invisible rhythms we don't yet understand. This is not the sun of golden afternoon. This is a more secret sun. For many years, scientists looked mostly at the middle of the sun, the place where its light seemed brightest and strongest. But the poles, especially the southern pole, stayed hidden. Why? Because we orbit the sun in a flat plane like marbles circling a bowl. We always see its face from the side. Its top and bottom, its true crown and its base, remain angled away, hard to see, impossible to map. It's like staring at the stem of a sunflower without ever glimpsing the roots or the petals blooming at the top. So for centuries we guessed, we imagined, we built simulations, but we could not look directly. Until now. The solar orbiter, a silent traveler launched into space, is drifting in a tilted path. Unlike Earth's usual view, this probe is lifting its eyes, tilting its orbit little by little, to finally peer over the sun's shoulder and down toward its southern end. And what it sees is not flat, not still, not calm. There are winds here, winds not of air but of particles, invisible streams of plasma. Charged pieces of the sun itself, flung outward into space, racing at hundreds of kilometers per second. These winds burst from the poles like exhalations, steady and strong, shaped by magnetic fields that wrap the sun in invisible threads. The southern pole breathes in pulses, sending streams of solar wind outward that shape everything we know. They help sculpt the tail of Earth's magnetic field. They strike planets and stir auroras into being. They touch comets and help carve their glowing trails. But these polar winds are not always the same. Sometimes they shift, sometimes they slow or flare. And it's here, in these changes, that scientists hear a whisper of the sun's deeper behavior, a whisper that may help us understand solar storms before they begin. Imagine the solar wind as a river made not of water but of light and heat. Now picture that river spilling from a place we've never seen, a deep well of energy near the sun's bottom edge. This is the southern pole, and though we can't dip our hands into that flow, we can measure its speed, we can watch its brightness, we can map its curves, and as we do, we begin to learn the shape of something larger, the engine of our star. This southern region is colder than you'd expect, quieter too. It's not because the sun is ever truly cold, but because the winds here are steadier, more uniform. The chaos of flares and storms found near the sun's middle grows gentler here. The magnetic fields stretch out long and open like threads unraveling, and in this openness the wind finds freedom. It escapes not in bursts but in whispers, long, steady breaths of star stuff flowing through space. But every now and then, even here, something stirs. A knot in the field, a ripple of energy, and from it, a burst. A fast stream of particles launched into the black. These are not storms yet, but they are the seeds of storms. And the more we watch, the more we see these seeds fall from the southern pole like sparks, like pollen, like memories returning to the wind. No spacecraft has ever flown directly over the sun's poles. Not yet, but the dream is growing. Missions are being planned. Engineers sketch orbits that would dive over and down, letting us glimpse the full crown, the true breath of our star. For now, the solar orbiter gives us hints. It shows us patterns. It catches the edges of mysteries and sends them home. And as we receive these whispers, we listen. We listen for rhythm, for shifts, for signs that might tell us when the next solar wind will rise strong, when it might bend toward Earth, when it might carry with it the tremble of a magnetic storm. The southern pole is not just a place. It is a pulse. It is a clock that keeps time in the language of plasma and light. So the next time you stand in the sunlight and feel it warm your skin, remember this. That heat may have come not from the center of the sun, but from its bottom edge, from the cold, silent south where solar wind is born. A wind you cannot see. A wind that began in stillness, drifted through fire, and found its way, at last, to you. Let's drift deeper now, beyond the first winds, beyond the flickering edges of what we know, and into the heart of the polar breath itself. For what lies beneath the crown is not only the source of particles, but the map of time, the long memory of the sun's rhythm written in fields and flows, invisible yet vast. The southern pole is more than a region. It is a kind of turning point, a hinge in the great machinery of the solar cycle. Every 11 years, the sun forgets and remembers. Its magnetic field flips. What was once the north becomes the south. And in this slow dance, the polar regions begin the transformation before the rest of the star even stirs. The south whispers first. It changes quietly. It prepares the sun for the storm to come. Imagine a clock made not of gears, but of glowing lines, magnetic loops that twist and stretch across the surface of the sun. These loops rise and fall like waves in molten gold. But when the time comes, something happens at the poles. The loops begin to fade, the fields weaken, and from the softness of that weakening, a reversal blooms. It's almost like a heartbeat you cannot hear, yet the sun feels it. The southern pole, in particular, starts shedding its magnetic skin, flipping polarity like a coin turned over in slow motion. That moment of change, soft, silent, nearly invisible, is the beginning of everything else. Why does the south begin first? No one knows. It may be older in some magnetic sense. It may be a cradle of the sun's internal tides, or perhaps it listens more closely to the deep churn of plasma below. Whatever the reason, this mysterious tilt toward change gives the southern pole an almost prophetic quality. It senses the future. It begins the transformation. And then slowly the rest of the sun follows. During these shifts, the solar wind behaves differently. Its speed may vary. Its flow may become tangled. The quiet breath becomes interrupted by gusts, as though the star is catching its breath mid-dream. Scientists study these variations not just to understand the sun, but to anticipate the ways it will affect us. For the solar wind is not just a cosmic breeze, it is an influence, a messenger, a sculptor of space weather. It can touch satellites, stir electrical grids, paint auroras, and reshape the very shield of Earth's magnetosphere. And so we watch the south carefully. We study its light through special lenses, like the extreme ultraviolet eyes of the solar orbiter. These instruments do not see like we do. They watch in wavelengths too fine for our eyes, capturing the threads of magnetic motion that dance along the sun's surface. In those threads, they find secrets, long, pale arches of plasma that curve and drift like smoke over a candle. These arches connect regions of different polarity. They bridge the gap between what is and what will be, and they often begin at the poles. Below these arches, the sun's surface trembles. It is not solid, it is not even still. It is a boiling sea of hot plasma, rising and falling in vast cells like breath over a sleeping body. These convection patterns, called granules, push heat upward, and with it magnetic fields that twist into knots. Some of these knots drift toward the poles. They accumulate, they collect like stories waiting to be told, and when enough gather, they help trigger the great reversal. Now imagine this motion not as a mechanism, but as a melody. A song the sun sings to itself over and over through centuries and millennia. The southern pole carries the opening note. It is the first verse, quiet and low, that begins the solar song of change. As the field weakens and flips, the southern lights, the polar coronal holes expand. These are regions where the sun's magnetic field opens directly into space, allowing solar wind to escape freely. When they grow, the wind flows stronger. When they shrink, the breath slows. This breath is not chaotic. It carries patterns, slow undulations that shape the weather of space. And it reaches out across the solar system, shaping the invisible heliosphere, the great magnetic bubble that protects our planets from interstellar radiation. The shape of this bubble depends on the rhythm of the solar wind. And so, from the gentle exhale of the sun's south, a shield is woven, stretching far beyond the orbit of Neptune. There's beauty in that something so fierce, so blinding, could also be soft. That the south pole of the sun, the most hidden of places, might hold the gentlest hand in the shaping of our cosmic safety. The sun is fire, yes, but it is also flow. It is memory. It is balance. When you think of the sun, you may think of heat and flame and brightness so intense it burns shadows away. But the southern pole tells a different story. It is a place of subtle changes, of steady winds and patient cycles, of reversals that take years, of arches that span thousands of kilometers but move like sighs. It teaches us that even the fiercest star can have a quiet side, a thoughtful rhythm. a deep and silent wisdom. The more we look, the more we learn that the southern pole is a beginning place, a fountain from which the solar cycle flows. It does not shout, it does not storm, but it turns gently, and in that turning the sun is reborn again and again. Let's rest here a while longer in this delicate space where fire flows like breath and light curls like memory. Let your imagination stand near that invisible line, just at the edge of where the magnetic field bends. Feel how quiet it is, how steady, how ancient. This is where the sun renews itself. This is where the whisper becomes wind. Now let us drift downward into the final layer of this quiet solar tale, into the closing echoes of the sun's southern breath. For all the science we've whispered through, magnetic lines, plasma streams, and flipped fields, there remains something more tender still. The quiet awe of knowing that even our star, the giver of all life and warmth, has places we barely understand. The southern pole, hidden from earthbound eyes for so long, is not just a source of wind or a trigger of storms. It is a kind of memory keeper, a place where time gathers its weight, where the cycles of the sun are written not in words, but in patterns of motion and stillness, of turning and returning again and again. Imagine the sun not as a machine, but as a heartbeat. Its surface pulses with living fire, its fields stretch like tendrils of thought, and deep at its south, where darkness meets flame, it begins its next breath long before the rest of the star follows. This is the cradle of the cycle, the first motion before the music begins. What stirs here affects all that comes after, and yet it is so quiet, so unseen. It is not loud like a flare, not sudden like a burst of light. It is the whisper beneath the song, the gentle hand beneath the storm. As the solar orbiter tilts its orbit further year after year, it sends back glimpses, shadows of arches, flickers of movement, sudden releases of energy that rise from the pole like a sigh. With each pass we gather more detail. We begin to see how the solar wind is not random but braided, twisting gently with magnetic strands that carry the sun's history inside them. Some strands flow straight, others spiral, and all of them trace back again and again to the open gates of the southern pole. One day, perhaps a spacecraft will fly directly above this pole. It will look straight down into the eye of the solar spiral, and what it sees may change how we understand the star that feeds us. But even now, even with only side glances and oblique whispers, we have begun to learn. We have learned that the southern pole is not empty. It is a wellspring, a compass of plasma, a dial that turns the sun's rhythm, and we, orbiting far below, feel its touch. The particles released from here take days to reach us. By the time they do, they've lost the shape of their source, but they carry its intent. They carry echoes of the field lines they once rode. When they arrive, they meet the Earth's magnetic shield, pushing gently against it. Sometimes they're deflected, sometimes they slip through, and when they do, they dance with our sky. They paint the polar night with ribbons of green and violet, soft arcs of light that curve across the world like the sun's own breath drawn on air. And so, you see, the southern pole of the sun is connected to our own poles. North and south, star and earth, light and atmosphere. It is a relationship of breath. What the sun exhales, we receive. What it begins in silence, we feel in color. The solar wind from the south may travel millions of kilometers, but its destination is intimate. It reaches us. It reaches you. Instruments on Earth listen, too. They trace the speed and shape of this wind. They monitor its density, its magnetism, its subtle variations. And through these measurements, we've discovered that the southern wind is more than just particles. It carries structure. It carries rhythm. It carries moments of stillness between each stream, like the pause between heartbeats or the space between waves. Scientists use these clues to predict solar weather, to protect satellites and astronauts, to understand the timing of flares and the geometry of space storms. And still, behind all of it, the southern pole remains, steady, hidden, patient. There's a kind of comfort in knowing that our star has this quiet place, a place that doesn't burn too brightly or roar with flares, a place that simply turns and turns again, marking the ages of light, long before. Humans looked up, long before Earth cooled, long before memory itself had shape, the sun was breathing, and it will keep breathing long after we are gone. So now, as we close this story, let yourself rest in that thought, that in the silence of space there is a southern breath, soft, warm, eternal, that the light on your skin may have started its journey from a place you'll never see, that even the greatest fires can have gentle edges, that in every sunrise, in every flicker of warmth on a cold cheek, there is a whisper from the bottom of the sun. The secret winds beneath the solar crown are no longer quite so secret, but they are still sacred, still full of wonder, still unfolding. And though we may never walk there, never feel that solar wind against our skin, we carry it all the same, in the warmth we feel, in the magnetic field that guards our world, and in the quiet knowledge that even stars have places of mystery, where the universe speaks in sighs and silence. At the very rim of the sun's face, where brightness slips into shadow and light leans into the abyss of space, there is a restless dance unfolding, a ballet of fire, delicate and wild. These are the solar prominences, the flickering arcs of flame that leap from the sun's surface and curl back like ribbons of glowing silk. If you could stand in stillness just beyond the corona, watching with ancient eyes, you would see them rise and fall like breathing, like dreams moving through the air. But they are not air. They are not flame in the way we know fire. These are not born of wood or wick, but of plasma, hot charged gas, so intense it listens to magnetism rather than gravity. And the stage for this dance is vast, tens of thousands of kilometers wide, sometimes even more, enough to swallow our Earth whole within a single loop of flame. These prominences form slowly, gracefully, looping into space and holding their shape for days or even weeks. Some hover, serene and arched, others twist like vines searching for sun. They seem to defy the very chaos of the star beneath them. The sun's surface, the photosphere, is a storm of convecting plasma, boiling cells rising and falling, bursting into light. But above that chaos, in the outer layers where magnetism reigns, the prominences take shape. They form in the chromosphere and extend into the corona, drawn along magnetic field lines, rising like dancers that follow the trace of music in the air. The field lines themselves are invisible threads, shaped by the sun's rotation and the tides of its inner plasma. They bend and curve in response to deeper flows, coiling into loops that guide the charged gas above. The prominences are the visible garment of these hidden fields, flame tracing the shape of silence. What we see as light is the echo of magnetic thought, the outer sketch of something deeper and unseen. Not every day offers a grand display. Some days the edge of the sun flickers only gently, but other days you might witness a filament rising, a long dark ribbon stretched across the solar disk, poised to lift into the air. These filaments are prominences seen in silhouette, and they hold their own quiet drama. For hours they rest like slumbering snakes across the sun's face, their darkness not a lack of light, but a shadow cast by their own dense plasma. Then, without warning, they rise. They lift and arch, curling upward like dancers waking from a long stillness, their forms guided by tension in the magnetic field. Sometimes they fall back peacefully, other times they erupt. When a prominence erupts, it becomes something else entirely, a coronal mass ejection, a storm in space. The gentle dance turns wild, the loops snap, and the plasma within is hurled into space at millions of kilometers per hour. If Earth lies in the path, we may see a geomagnetic storm, our skies alive with auroras, our satellites whispering with static. But even when no eruption follows, the act of rising and falling is beautiful in its own right. The sun is alive not just in light, but in motion, and at its edges, where fire curls into emptiness, it tells stories in arcs and spirals. Consider how delicate these structures are. Suspended against gravity, held together by magnetic tension, they are in constant dialogue with the sun's interior. The dynamo deep inside, the movement of plasma that generates the sun's magnetic field, sends ripples outward. These ripples become patterns, and the patterns become loops, and the loops become flame. Every prominence is a visible response to something ancient and hidden, a surface sign of an inner dance. You could almost call it choreography, flame guided by invisible steps, dancing along the curved space around a star. And though we can see them now with modern instruments, telescopes tuned to hydrogen's red light, satellites tracing ultraviolet and extreme ultraviolet spectra, prominences have whispered to us for centuries. Even before we understood them, early astronomers saw them. During total eclipses, rose-colored tendrils stretching into space, framing the black circle of the moon. To the eyes of ancient watchers, they must have looked like the sun sighing, its edges trembling with thought, and in a way they were right. What's most remarkable is the silence. These vast fountains of plasma rise and fall with no sound. In the vacuum of space, fire does not crackle, light does not hum. The great dancing prominences unfold in perfect stillness like slow-motion dreams played in silence. Their beauty is not in noise but in form, in shape, in time. A loop that grows over hours, a spiral that twists for days. It is a lesson in patience, in scale, in grace. And still they are dangerous too, for though they seem soft and slow, the energy they hold is immense. A single prominence can contain billions of tons of plasma, all hovering, waiting, balanced like a cup filled to the brim. If the balance is lost, if the magnetic lines snap, the contents spill into the void. These events are rare, but they are real, and they remind us that the sun, for all its beauty, is powerful beyond comprehension. The dancers on its edge may seem delicate, but they move with forces that shape space. There are times when multiple prominences bloom at once, like petals on a spinning flower. Solar physicists call these active regions. places where the sun's magnetic field is tangled and strong, generating both flares and loops. In these regions, the prominences rise more quickly, more energetically, their loops growing and folding back into the star, forming figures that seem alive. We've seen double loops, twisting loops, even great serpentine arcs that cross halfway around the sun's edge. These are not accidents, they are the signs of deeper tides. The sun is not a uniform sphere. Its surface turns at different speeds near the equator and the poles. This differential rotation twists the magnetic field like a coiled rope. Over time, the tension builds, and where the field lines break through the surface, they create sunspots, cooler, darker regions. Around these sunspots, the field lines curve outward, forming the magnetic canopies that give rise to prominences. So in a way, every dancer at the edge begins as a twist in the field, as a dark spot on the sun's surface. From shadow, flame is born. And we from 150 million kilometers away watch, we map, we measure, we wonder. But part of the story is not for instruments, it is for the spirit. For the sense of awe that rises when we see flame floating in space, anchored not by gravity but by magnetism. When we realize that something so large can move so gracefully, that even a star boiling, wild, ancient, can have moments of beauty that are not violent but quiet, not explosive but poised. Tonight, perhaps you'll look at the sky and see the stars. You will not see the sun, but it is there, behind the night, turning slowly, its edges lined with curling fire. Prominences are rising even now, unseen but real, dancing where no eye can watch. And though we are far, we are connected. The light we feel, the warmth that wraps us, began in the heart of that star, but it passed the rim. It passed the dancers. It carried their memory. At the edge of the sun, the fire does not rage. It sways. It lingers. It returns. There in the thinness between star and space, flame becomes grace. And that too is part of the sun's gift, not just its heat, not just its light, but its rhythm, its stillness, its dance. Let us drift further now, into the patterns beneath the flame, where the motion of the sun becomes more than brightness, it becomes memory. Each dancing prominence we've seen curling at the edge of the sun is not just a burst of beauty, but a recording of tension, a shape written by pressure and patience. These structures, though they rise like flame, are born from the deepest flows inside the sun, born of magnetic fields pulled and spun by rotation and time. Their graceful arcs are not random. They are signs of something deeper, something vast and slow, breathing through the skin of a star. Inside the sun, beneath the photosphere where no light escapes, plasma churns in rolling waves. These waves are unimaginably huge, flowing in columns and cells that would swallow continents whole. As they move, they drag magnetic fields with them, stretching and twisting the lines into loops and spirals. It is these buried patterns that eventually erupt to form prominences. But what emerges on the surface is only a shadow of the deeper work. The true source lies in the dynamo, the deep magnetic engine of the sun, turning slowly like a forgotten wheel, winding up the energy that will one day reach the edges of space as a loop of glowing plasma. The connection between the deep and the visible is subtle, like the link between thought and breath. When you see a prominence lift from the sun's edge, you're watching a decision that was made days or weeks earlier, deep inside the star. You're watching the consequence of a million small motions, a rising tide of tension that finally finds a path to release. And yet, when it happens, it looks like art. It looks like a ribbon caught in a breeze. That contrast, the violence beneath and the grace above, is what makes solar prominences so mesmerizing. As the sun ages, it moves through cycles, each about 11 years long. These cycles are marked by the rise and fall of solar activity, more sunspots, more flares, more prominences. In the early parts of the cycle, the sun is quieter, the edges are less crowded, but as the years pass, the magnetic fields become more tangled. They push through the surface more often and with more force. This is when we see the grandest prominences, those vast loops that arch and twist like fiery bridges. And just as the cycles rise, they also fall. After the peak, the sun calms again, the dancers grow fewer, the flames less wild. These patterns are important not just for beauty, but for balance. The sun's magnetic field affects all of us, shaping space weather, guiding cosmic radiation, and protecting the planets inside its reach. Prominences are part of that system. They help carry magnetic energy from inside the sun into the corona, the sun's outer atmosphere. And though the corona is faint and thin, it's where some of the most intense processes occur. It's a region of paradox, where temperature rises even as pressure falls, and where loops of plasma hang suspended in ways that seem to defy physics. This is where the prominences live, half in the sun, half in space, held aloft by invisible lines. There's something poetic about that in-between place. The edge of anything is always special. The edge of the ocean, the edge of a forest, the edge of sleep. It's where two worlds touch, where change begins. And at the edge of the sun, flame touches vacuum, heat meets cold, motion meets stillness. Prominences bloom in this threshold, in this liminal zone, and their presence teaches us how fragile and strong a star can be at once. The technology we use to study them is delicate too. Instruments like the Solar Dynamics Observatory and the Solar and Heliospheric Observatory record these dances in high detail, capturing the loops in many wavelengths. Some see the hot core, others trace the cooler filaments. Together, they paint a portrait of motion and balance. We can now model how prominences rise, how they twist, how they sometimes become unstable. But there's still so much we don't know. Why do some last for weeks while others vanish in hours? Why do some erupt and others return? What determines the shape of their fall? These are not just academic questions. When prominences erupt, they can send shockwaves through space. If the ejection is aimed toward Earth, it can compress our planet's magnetic field, induce currents in power lines, and disturb the navigation of satellites. These solar storms are rare, but when they happen, they remind us of our connection to the sun. We live in the light of a star, but also in the shadow of its moods. Yet even with this potential for disruption, the prominences themselves are never violent in their own frame. They are slow, they are deliberate, they unfold over hours, even days. Watching a prominence form is like watching a tree grow in fast motion, branches curling, stretching, rising into the sky, or like ink dropped in water, blooming outward, held together by currents you cannot see. Their silence is what makes them feel so distant, so dreamlike, but they are not distant at all. They are part of the breath of our star, and their effects reach us with every passing day. Even now, scientists are exploring how prominences might connect to deeper phenomena. Could the way they rise be a reflection of hidden structures beneath the sun's surface? Could their shape help us map the magnetic web that spans the corona? Some models suggest that by watching the way a prominence curves, we can infer the strength and direction of the field lines it follows. In that way, every prominence is a clue, a gentle tracer of something vast and invisible. They are not just flames, they are messages. Written in light, curved by magnetism, read in silence. As the sun continues its endless turning, new prominences rise even now, curling above the edge, unseen by human eyes in this moment, but captured by machines orbiting far from home. Each one is unique. No two loops are exactly the same. Some are tall and narrow, some are wide and low, some twist into ropes, some fall back in threads. The diversity is part of the story. The sun is not repeating itself, it is composing anew each moment, each loop a fresh line in its poem of fire. And yet through all this difference there is rhythm, a pulse beneath the glow. You could almost call it breath. The way prominences rise and fall, pause and erupt, it feels alive. Not conscious, not thinking, but alive in motion, in pattern, in meaning. And we, the watchers, feel it too. Even from this distance, even through layers of atmosphere and silence, we feel the story of the sun in the warmth on our skin, in the auroras in our skies, in the slight shifts of our world that echo a change at the edge of a star. Let us remain here a little longer, in this liminal place where motion becomes memory, where fire curls in slow spirals, where the sun whispers its cycles not in words, but in arcs of glowing plasma dancing at the edge of space. There is something soothing here, something ancient, something gentle. Even in the presence of power there is peace. Even in the flames of a star there is grace. And now, as we move toward the final folds of this story, let us stay close to the flame that dances at the sun's edge, not to be warmed, but to understand. For in the curling arcs of plasma that drift between star and space, we see not only the surface of the sun, but something more timeless, its way of speaking, its way of remembering, its way of letting go. Solar prominences do not simply form and vanish. They leave traces. They sculpt the corona. They carry the invisible marks of old storms and older rhythms. Their movement is not only about energy, it is about the passing of time, a clock without hands, counting in arches of light. Each prominence, as it rises, stretches farther than any mountain on Earth. Some reach 100,000 kilometers or more, their curves drawn with a kind of cosmic elegance that makes our tallest structures seem like dust. And yet, despite their size, they remain balanced, suspended between forces that pull and push, between magnetism that lifts and gravity that holds. This balance is delicate. When the field lines below begin to twist too tightly, the shape begins to shift. Like a dancer slowly leaning beyond her center, the prominence begins to sway. Tension builds in silence, and then in a moment that spans no more than minutes, the balance breaks, the prominence erupts. These eruptions are among the most powerful events in the solar system. A coronal mass ejection, launched from such a prominence, can carry more mass than all the water in Earth's oceans, flung into space at speeds that could cross our planet in less than a day. When they head toward Earth, they ripple through our magnetic field. They can charge the skies with auroras, bend satellite signals, and stir electric currents into power grids. Yet from the sun's perspective, these events are part of the natural rhythm. Not violence but release, not destruction but rebalancing. Even the most dramatic arcs, the wildest ejections, are part of the breathing cycle of a star. And still, not all prominences end in eruption. Some rise and simply dissolve, their plasma slowly cooling and drifting back down, raining into the sun like glowing mist. These are called failed eruptions, but perhaps that name is wrong. There is no failure in returning, in letting the energy pass through without explosion, in rising just enough to stretch, to reach, to express, and then coming home. These falling prominences often break into fine threads, long strands of plasma that drift like silk over the surface. They shimmer, they fade, and then they are gone. What makes one prominence erupt and another return remains in part a mystery. Scientists build models, track measurements, compare events across cycles. They learn from patterns, they refine predictions, but the sun is complex. It does not repeat itself exactly. Its surface is not still but fluid. Its fields are not fixed but in constant motion. And in that shifting sea, even the same magnetic shape may behave differently one day than it does the next. That unpredictability is part of what makes the sun feel alive. Not conscious, not aware, but alive in change, in variation, in rhythm. This is what fascinates solar physicists most, that behind all the fire and brightness is a quiet order, one shaped by rules but filled with surprise. The prominences, floating at the edge, become a kind of language, curves that speak of tension, of motion, of transformation. They are bridges between the seen and unseen. They rise from the lower atmosphere and stretch into the corona, connecting layers of the sun like a hand reaching into a dream. And we here on Earth are beginning to listen, not just with our eyes but with understanding, with context. Each prominence helps build the full picture of how our star works, how it breathes, how it protects and shapes the space around it. Future missions like Solar Orbiter and Parker Solar Probe will continue this exploration, bringing us closer to the edge, giving us sharper glimpses of the dance. Perhaps one day we will understand the exact moment a prominence decides to rise, to twist, to break. Perhaps we will learn the secret of its shape. Perhaps we will simply continue to watch, to marvel, to learn by quiet attention. There's something profoundly human in that act of watching. We've always been drawn to fire, to light. From the earliest days when we sat by campfires and stared at the flickering flame, we've been mesmerized by the way energy moves, the way brightness changes form. The sun's prominences are like those ancient flames, only grander, more distant, and more mysterious. They call to the same place inside us, the place that seeks beauty in motion and meaning in glow. And though we may never touch them, never feel the heat of a prominence on our skin, we are not separate from them. The sun's light feeds the earth, its warmth shapes our climate, its magnetism guards our planet, and the prominences, those curling arcs of fire at the edge, are part of that gift. They are part of the machinery of balance, the gentle exhalations of a living star. Let's end here at the very edge of flame, in the thin place between day and dark. Let the last image linger, a quiet arc rising, curving into space, suspended in silence, its form outlined by light. It doesn't erupt, it doesn't fall, it just stays for one long moment, a breath held by the sun. And in that moment everything slows, the cycles pause, the field lines rest, and you, watching from so far away, feel the strange closeness of it all. The flame that dances at the sun's edge is not far. It is in the warmth of morning, in the hush of evening light, in the quiet rhythm of your own breath, a soft echo of a star's patient fire. Far below the roaring surface of the sun, beneath the flares and bursts and glowing arcs, there is a place most have never imagined, a place not of fire but of silence. Here in the deep layers of the sun, the noise of storms fades into something quieter, colder, slower. It is a place untouched by light, where pressure is heavy, and motion moves like a long breath drawn inward. This is the solar interior, where plasma does not blaze in wild jets but flows like a river beneath stone. It is not still, but it is calm, and in this quiet space, something astonishing is born, the very engine that powers all the storms above. At first glance, the sun seems like a ball of unending chaos, flames licking out into space, surface boiling with motion, bright flares exploding without warning. But these are only the surface moods, the outward signs of something deeper. To understand the sun's true nature, you must go inward, past the photosphere where light escapes, through the thick convection zone where heat rises in slow waves, and into the radiative zone below. This is where the cold silence begins, not cold in the way we know it, for temperatures here still reach millions of degrees, but cold in motion. Cold in comparison to the outer layers that churn like seas in a storm. The radiative zone is vast, stretching from the sun's core to nearly 3/4 of the way to the surface. In this region, energy is passed not through swirling fluid but by radiation, photons slowly bouncing, scattering, absorbed, and re-emitted again and again. A single photon created in the sun's core might take tens of thousands of years to make its way out. It moves like a traveler lost in fog, every step redirected, every path uncertain. And in this endless bouncing, the violence of nuclear fusion is smoothed into the gentle warmth we feel on Earth. But it is below even this zone, at the very heart of the sun, where the true silence lives. The core is a small space, only about 1/10 of the sun's diameter, and yet it holds the weight of all things. This is where hydrogen is fused into helium, where mass becomes energy, where the ancient equation of E equals mc2 turns pressure into light. The particles here are pressed so closely together that fusion is not a rare event. It is constant, ceaseless, the very act that gives the sun its life. But despite the intensity, the core does not flare. It does not erupt. It glows steadily, quietly, invisibly. This paradox is at the heart of the solar mystery, that the greatest power comes from the calmest place, that the sun, our source of light and life, is born not in flames but in stillness. The storms we see on the surface are echoes, ripples carried upward through layers of time and matter. The flares and prominences, the twisting fields and bursts of heat, all these are the outer expression of an inner quiet, a silence so deep it speaks only in warmth. And yet this silence is not empty. It is full of movement, of memory, of rhythm. The sun's core pulses faintly, almost like a heartbeat. These are not heartbeats of blood, but of pressure, waves of sound that ripple through the solar interior, rising and falling with perfect regularity. They are called P-modes or pressure modes, and they are the sun's voice. We cannot hear them directly, but we can detect their effect. They cause the surface of the sun to vibrate gently, like the skin of a drum touched by invisible fingers. By studying these oscillations, scientists have learned to peer into the sun's interior, much like geologists use earthquakes to study Earth's layers. This field of stud is called heliosysmology, and it is how we know that beneath the storms lies silence. Instruments on Earth and in space watch the sun's surface and record its tiny tremors, mapping the waves that move through its body. From this, we've discovered the hidden rotation of the sun's interior, the way different layers turn at different speeds, the slow swirling of plasma beneath the outer fury. And we've found that deep within, far from the light, the sun turns more evenly, more slowly, in long, graceful spirals. It is here in the quiet twist of these deep flows that the seeds of solar storms are planted. For although the core itself is not magnetic, the layers above it, the radiative and convective zones, generate the sun's magnetic field through motion. This motion is subtle, like tides beneath the sea. The plasma turns and folds, rising and falling, pulling magnetic lines with it. Over time, these lines stretch and tangle, storing energy like a wound spring. Eventually, the tension reaches the surface, and a flare or prominence is born. But the true beginning is here, in the slow, cold churn of the deep sun. The outer chaos is rooted in this inner order. Without the silent motion below, there would be no eruption above. This is the heart of the paradox, that quiet gives rise to noise, that peace feeds storm, that the calm beneath the sun creates the fury on its face. Think of it like the roots of a tree. We see the leaves, the blossoms, the sway of branches in the wind, but none of that would exist without the hidden system below, the roots that drink, the soil that holds. The sun is the same. The surface shines, but the power begins deep inside, and just like a tree, the sun's roots are not loud. They are patient. They grow slowly. They carry the memory of seasons and cycles, not in flash or color, but in rhythm. When we look at the sun, we see brightness. We see the flare of light that touches everything on Earth. But that light is not young. It began its journey thousands of years ago as a photon released in the core. That photon bounced and scattered through the radiative zone, moved upward through the convection layer, and finally broke free into space. What we feel on our skin today began in the cold silence of a time we cannot name. The light is ancient, not because of its age in years, but because of the journey it took to reach us. And in that journey is a kind of story, a story of transformation, of patience, of movement through layers. It is the story of the sun itself, not just as a source of heat, but as a being with depth, with memory, with hidden calm. The silence below the solar storm is not an absence, it is a beginning. It is the space where energy is gathered, shaped, and set on its way. A place where time moves slowly but surely. A place where creation begins without a sound. Let this be a reminder that behind all storms lies stillness, that the brightest things often rise from the quietest places, and that even in a star there is peace, not on the surface, not in the glow, but deep within, in the cold silence below the fire where light is born in the dark. Let's now sink even deeper into the quiet heart of the sun, where motion feels like memory and time drips like honey through the folds of pressure and light. Below the flare, beneath the corona's roar, farther still than the churning granules that decorate the surface, there exists a world so constant, so immense, that its silence humbles every storm that dances above. This is the domain of slow physics, of balance maintained over millions of years, of forces in perfect negotiation. We often look to the sky and see the sun as a fiery god, wild and golden, a creature of light. But down here within its belly, the sun is more like a monk in meditation, still, powerful, folded in thought. And in this stillness, the great engine of the universe turns. The energy that feeds our planet's days begins not in chaos, but in structure. The sun's core, under pressures we cannot recreate and densities beyond our most daring instruments, is an orderly place. A place where protons meet and fuse, transforming into helium in a slow, continual process that turns mass into radiant power. Each fusion event is a whisper, tiny, invisible, and yet so frequent that it powers an entire solar system. In this deep core, the temperature reaches 15 million degrees, but not a flame is seen. There is no flicker here, only glow, only the quiet collision of particles, happening again and again with patient certainty. From this source, the energy begins a long climb outward. It does not leap like lightning or pour like a river. Instead, it diffuses, it drifts, it bounces. A photon born in the core may take hundreds of thousands of years to reach the sun's surface, changing direction countless times in a crowded dance of collisions and re-emissions. This path through the radiative zone is not a journey of distance, but of time, so slow, so random that it feels more like wandering than motion. And yet it is here that energy is softened. The raw heat of fusion is mellowed, stretched across centuries, emerging finally at the boundary of the convection zone like breath rising to the edge of sleep. The convection zone is where things begin to stir more freely. Here the plasma becomes less dense, more buoyant, and the energy from below is lifted in great columns, like hot air rising through water. These columns form convection cells that rise and fall, turning over heat in a motion like boiling honey. From Earth, we see the tops of these cells as granules, bright spots surrounded by darker lanes, each one the size of a continent. They come and go in cycles of minutes, the visible flutter of the sun's hidden breath. But beneath them, the flows stretch downward in vast spirals, connecting with deeper patterns that rotate more slowly, more deliberately. These internal flows are not mere background motion, they are the architects of the sun's magnetic life. As plasma moves through these zones, it drags magnetic fields with it, wrapping them into coils and loops. Over time, these fields become complex, twisting into knots and braids that store energy like springs. This magnetic tangle is what eventually bursts forth as sunspots, flares, and prominences. But the origin of the field, the deep stirring that sets it all in motion, happens far below the surface. In a region called the tachocline, where the smooth rotation of the radiative zone meets the turbulent churning of the convection layer, something special happens. Here, the sun's internal magnetic field is amplified, shaped, and fed into the solar cycle. It is a place of transformation, a thin shell that holds the key to the sun's stormy moods. Scientists believe the tachocline plays a crucial role in the solar dynamo, the mechanism that creates and sustains the sun's magnetic field. Though we cannot see it directly, models suggest it is a zone of sharp transition, where differential rotation twists the magnetic lines into new configurations. Over time, this process causes the field to flip. North becomes south, and south becomes north, every 11 years in a rhythm older than any civilization. The solar cycle is born not in the glare of sunlight, but in this slow, internal turning, and each flip begins in silence. As the magnetic field changes, the effects ripple outward. New sunspots appear at different latitudes. The number of solar flares rises and falls. The corona becomes more active, but beneath all of it, the tachocline turns on then rests. It does not erupt, it does not shine, it simply shifts, slowly, invisibly, like a current beneath a frozen lake, and yet it is this hidden shifting that brings the light. Imagine the sun now not as a sphere of fire, but as a layered song. A song that begins in the deepest silence and rises through crescendos of heat and motion. Each layer adds its own rhythm, the deep hum of fusion, the shimmer of photons, the swell of convection, the crackle of magnetism. By the time the song reaches the surface, it is complex, full of harmony and dissonance, beauty and noise, but it began in stillness, and even now that stillness sings. We may never journey physically into the sun's interior. The heat, the pressure, the density, it is beyond what any probe can endure, but we are learning to listen. Through heliosismology, we chart the echoes that rise from deep within. Through models and simulations, we recreate the currents we cannot see. Through light, we trace time, and in doing so, we draw closer to the truth, that the sun is not only a furnace but a thinker, not conscious but patterned, not aware but remembering. Each rotation, each reversal, Each rise in flare or filament is part of a long memory, etched into the flows that churn in the dark. This understanding changes how we see the sun, not as a simple ball of heat, but as a system, as a body. It has layers like lungs, cycles like heartbeats, regions of calm and flare, of rest and storm, and in its core it holds the stillest place, a chamber of fusion that burns with no flame, that feeds the sky with light it forged in perfect hush. Let us stay here a little longer in this quiet chamber beneath the storms. Let us remember that the next flicker of light we see outside may have begun here, in a moment so ancient it has no date. The heat that touches your skin tomorrow may have started as a murmur in this cold interior, as a photon nudged into motion by chance. It wandered, it climbed, it surfaced, and now it glows. This is the sun's true power, not only to shine but to wait, to build, to move without rush, to gather light in darkness and release it without sound. Now let us rise gently from the stillness below, as though floating upward through the layers of the sun's body, tracing the quiet origin of storms until we meet their wild expression. But even now, as we ascend from the radiative depths to the outer convective tides, we carry something with us, a sense that what is loud and bright above began in places dark and still. This knowledge colors everything we see at the surface. Each solar flare, each burst of wind, each tangled magnetic loop is no longer just an event. It is a consequence, a conclusion. The solar storm is not chaos, it is memory released. The sun's surface, the photosphere, ripples with motion. We see granules the size of continents rising and fading in moments. We see dark sunspots where magnetic fields burst through, disrupting the normal flow. Around them, loops of hot plasma soar into the corona, guided by magnetic lines like flames that follow unseen wires. Some of these loops bend back to the surface. Others grow tall and unstable, twisting with stored tension. When the tension snaps, a flare is born. Light floods outward. Radiation surges. Sometimes particles are hurled into space, coronal mass ejections that sail through the solar system like invisible tides. But beneath this chaos we now understand lies orchestration. A storm on the surface begins as a quiet folding of fields in the interior. The magnetic lines that guide these flares were drawn upward slowly, twisted gently by the sun's rotation, lifted by the long breath of the convection zone. The energy was stored not in seconds but in days, weeks, sometimes months. When it finally erupts, the release feels sudden. But the building was slow, it was thoughtful, it was rooted in the silence below. And this is what makes the sun so mysterious. It changes constantly, but in rhythms too wide for our eyes to see in a single glance. A sunspot lasts for days, a solar cycle for years, the journey of a photon for centuries. What we witness in the span of a human life is only a fraction of its movement, only a note in its larger song, but each note matters. Each quiet twist inside the sun becomes, one day, a flare that touches Earth. When these flares reach us, they interact with our planet's magnetic field. The particles ride along magnetic lines, funneled toward the poles where they stir the air into light. This is how auroras form, curtains of color waving across the night sky, green and violet and red, like solar breath dancing with Earth's own invisible shield. They are beautiful, yes, but they are also reminders. They remind us that we are not separate from the sun, we are part of its weather. What begins in its heart touches our sky. What stirs in its silence arrives at our home. Sometimes solar storms are strong enough to disrupt our tools. Satellites may falter, GPS may drift, electrical systems may hum with energy they were not built to hold. These are the practical consequences. But beneath them lies something more poetic, the idea that we are wrapped in a conversation we cannot hear, shaped by forces we do not feel directly. The space between us and the sun is not empty. It is filled with presence, with motion, with memory. That presence is not constant. It comes in waves governed by the solar cycle. Every 11 years, as the magnetic field reverses, the sun's activity increases. More flares, more prominences, more eruptions. The corona grows more twisted, the poles shift. The breath becomes wild, then slowly it quiets again. A long inhale, a long exhale. The sun remembers its balance and begins the cycle anew. And so storm follows stillness, light follows waiting, and always it begins below. There is something almost spiritual in this cycle. It reflects the rhythms we know in other places, in the beating of our hearts, in the changing of the seasons, in the movement of tides and dreams. The sun is not alive in the way we are, but it moves with life's shape. It breathes without lungs, it pulses without blood, it changes without thought, and from its center, that cold, silent core, comes everything we see. The next time you feel the sunlight on your skin, pause for a moment. Think about the journey that light has taken. It began in darkness, in the heavy center of a star, pressed from hydrogen into brightness. It climbed slowly, scattered and paused, carried by random steps through the radiative fog. It reached the convection zone and rose faster, lifted in wide loops of plasma until it reached the surface. Then, with nothing more to hold it, it fled outward, across space, across time, across the vacuum between stars, and found you. That light is not just energy, it is history, it is silence made visible, it is the memory of the sun, carried across the void in a line of warmth. And though we cannot see the core, though we cannot hear the P-modes ripple through the sun's belly, we know they are there. We know the silence beneath the solar storm shapes everything above it. Let this be the way we remember the sun, not only for its brightness, not only for its storms, but for its calm, for its patience, for the long silence that holds the power to light the sky. In every flare is a story that began in stillness, in every goo. Scent of solar wind, a whisper that rose from the dark. In every shimmer of light upon the earth, a message from the quiet heart of a star. High above the surface of the sun, where the golden light begins to lose its form and the sky no longer carries air, sunlight starts to twist. It twists not like a breeze caught between leaves, but like a thread of heat shaped by the memory of magnetism. Here in the sun's upper atmosphere, the corona light doesn't move in straight lines. It loops, it spirals, it follows invisible curves that have no weight, only direction. This is the space where energy becomes delicate, where fire becomes lace, and where sunlight turns, slowly and silently, into whispers that drift into the far reaches of space. The corona is a place of paradox. It is the outermost layer of the sun's atmosphere, a halo that stretches millions of kilometers into space. And yet, despite its distance from the core, despite its thinness, it is hotter than the layers below. While the surface of the sun glows at around 6,000 degrees Celsius, the corona reaches temperatures of over 1,000,000 degrees. This defies logic. It challenges what we think we know about heat and distance. How can something grow hotter the farther it is from the source? Scientists call it the coronal heating problem, and though many theories exist, no one yet holds the full answer. It is one of the sun's softest mysteries, hiding in the shimmer of its whispers. In this high, thin place, particles no longer behave as they do on Earth. They are rare, widely spaced, barely touching, and yet they are full of energy. The magnetic field here is king, guiding the plasma into loops and curves, creating arches of brightness that we see during solar eclipses and with space telescopes. These coronal loops are the visible edges of an invisible structure. They outline where the magnetic field bends and where energy is stored. They are not permanent. They shift with the sun's moods, changing over hours, days, and across the broader rhythm of the solar cycle. But even in their brief lifespans, they speak. They whisper of heat, of tension, of release. To see the corona clearly, you must block the sun's surface. Its overwhelming brightness masks the outer glow. That is why coronagraphs were invented, tools that create artificial eclipses in space by covering the solar disk so that the faint edges may be seen. And when you do see it, when you finally glimpse the whispering light that floats above the flame, you begin to feel the sun as more than a ball of fire. You feel it as a presence, as a breath. As something sculpted not by flame alone, but by shape and silence. This is where solar wind is born, not in the violent flares or the boiling surface, but in the slow, rising breath of the corona. The particles here, energized by heat and freed by magnetic openness, begin to drift outward. They do not rush. They do not burn. They flow. Gently at first, then faster, until they escape the sun's grasp entirely. This constant outflow of plasma becomes the solar wind, and it travels across the solar system, touching every planet, brushing past comets, shaping the tails of dust and ice, and eventually brushing against Earth's magnetic shield. But before it moves, it whispers. Before it races, it lingers. The twisting light of the corona reveals where this flow begins. Some regions, known as coronal holes, appear darker in ultraviolet light. These are places where the sun's magnetic field opens into space rather than curving back into itself. In these open zones, particles escape more easily. The wind is faster here, more direct. It is not a storm, it is a letting go. The corona releases its charge and the universe listens. Instruments aboard missions like the Parker Solar Probe and Solar Orbiter have flown through this whispering space, getting closer to the sun than any spacecraft before. They move not through fire, but through the edges of fire, through the delicate threads that hold energy without sound. These probes measure the particles, track the magnetic fields, listen to the turbulence of a wind born from silence. And what they find is a place of constant motion, but not chaos. The corona is dynamic, ever-changing, but within its changes are patterns, swirls, rotations, spirals, waves. It is a dance of particles guided by invisible fingers. Even the smallest motions here matter. A sudden shift in magnetic direction, a burst of wave-like energy moving through the plasma. These tiny changes, called Ulfane waves, may carry the secret of the coronal heat. They travel through the sun's atmosphere like ripples in a rope, transferring energy from deep within to the farthest edge. Some scientists believe these waves could be responsible for the million-degree temperatures, not through explosion but through accumulation, through resonance, through the slow sharing of motion across time. It is easy to think of the corona as an afterthought, as the last thin V. Isle of the sun's presence, but in truth it is one of the most important regions of all. It is the place where energy is stored and released, where solar storms begin, where space weather is shaped. And perhaps more poetically, it is the place where the sun's light begins to forget its origin and becomes something new, something that moves, that twists, that whispers its way through the cosmos. We sometimes call the corona a crown, and that word is fitting. It is not solid, not jeweled, not heavy, but it is regal in its own way. It surrounds the sun not with weight, but with wonder, and like any true crown, it carries meaning. It signals power, yes, but also legacy. The corona is the memory of all the energy the sun has gathered and is now releasing. It is a halo of change. Look at an image of the corona and you may see loops and fans and rays reaching into space. You may notice the symmetry or the lack of it. During solar minimum, the corona lies flatter, hugging the sun more closely. During solar maximum, it flares outward in wild asymmetry, sending tendrils in all directions. These shapes are not random. They reflect the sun's interior patterns, brought to the surface and stretched into space. Every twist, every curve is a sign of something deeper. So let this first glimpse into the corona stay with you, not as a fact to memorize, but as a feeling to carry. The next time you stand in sunlight, think not just of heat or brightness. Think of the millions of delicate threads that hang above the star you cannot see. Think of the energy that rises not in thunder, but in curls of light. Think of the places where sunlight twists, where fire flows in silence, where the corona turns its face to space and exhales softly, endlessly. For even in the heart of brilliance, there are shadows. Even in the center of heat, there are edges where quiet remains, and it is here, in this crown of whispers, that the sun begins to reach out, not with flame, but with grace. Let's wander deeper now into the winding pathways of the corona, where sunlight no longer shines in straight lines, but instead loops in spirals of invisible tension. It is a realm sculpted by magnetism and time, where every thread of brightness traces a hidden shape, and every motion carries the memory of some quiet unfolding. Here, above the surface yet still bound to the star, plasma behaves not like fluid or flame, but like breath caught in a net of magnetic dreams. The corona is not chaos. It is poetry in motion. It is heat wrapped in geometry, and in this delicate realm, the sun speaks its most intricate language. The source of this language is the sun's magnetic field, a vast, dynamic network of lines that rise from sunspots and spread outward, folding and reconnecting in patterns that shift with each heartbeat of the solar cycle. The magnetic field does not glow on its own, but it gives structure to the corona. It draws charged particles into arcs, loops, and ribbons of plasma that glow in ultraviolet and X-ray light. These are the shapes we see in images from space observatories, painted not with colors of pigment, but with the hues of energy. The corona is full of these forms. Some are small and fleeting, vanishing within hours. Others stretch across the solar limb, holding their shape for days. They look like threads of silk or the curved bones of invisible wings, and yet each one holds heat, each one stores tension. The loops are not passive. They are alive with current, with twisting motion, with slow-building pressure. The sun's magnetic field is not static. It churns and braids itself, and in doing so, it stores energy that may be released suddenly in flares or mass ejections. These quiet arcs are the muscles of future storms. One of the most graceful phenomena in the corona is the process of magnetic reconnection. This is when two field lines, moving and shifting over time, cross paths and snap into a new arrangement. In that instant, energy is released, not with fire but with a pulse of acceleration. Particles are hurled outward, waves ripple across the corona, and sunlight, already twisted into ribbons, briefly flares brighter. The structure changes, and the sun continues its rhythm, unaware of the delicate shock it has sent into space. This process is essential to understanding how solar flares and coronal mass ejections arise. Though we often imagine explosions and violence, the corona offers a different lesson. The energy builds not in seconds, but over days of gradual twisting. The release, though bright, is part of a cycle, a breath in, a breath out. And in between, the long, slow turn of fields invisible to the eye, seen only through their light-tracing loops. Coronal loops are not limited to quiet beauty. Some regions of the sun, called active regions, are more complex. Here, the magnetic field is tangled and strong, often near sunspots. In these zones, loops grow taller, more tightly wound. They twist around each other like vines. Herring a trellis, the heat here can be intense, the structure unstable. It is often from these places that the greatest solar flares originate, but before the flare there is silence. The corona does not shout, it waits. There is another mystery that lives here, the shape of the solar wind. Though born in the corona, the wind's direction and speed depend on the way magnetic field lines stretch. Some stretch back into the sun, creating closed loops that trap plasma. Others open into space, creating channels through which particles flow freely. These open field regions are coronal holes, dark spots in ultraviolet images, not because they are cold, but because they are thin, less dense, more open. They are windows through which the corona exhales. In these holes, the solar wind can reach speeds of over 700 kilometers per second. That wind does not howl. It drifts, it races, it crosses space in long, quiet streams. But what guides it is the map of magnetism above the sun. That map is constantly shifting. And so the wind, too, varies, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes steady, sometimes pulsed. It is like listening to breath through a forest, never the same twice. The corona also carries waves, not of sound, for sound cannot travel in such thin plasma, but of motion. Ulfane waves, magnetocaustic waves, and kink waves, all strange names for patterns of vibration that pass through the loops and arcs. These waves may help heat the corona, moving energy from the deeper layers outward without flame or friction. It's as though the sun hums to itself in frequencies we cannot hear, each note carrying heat from the body to the crown. We now know that the corona is not smooth. It is full of fine-scale structures, of small bright knots and flickering threads. Instruments like the high-resolution coronal imager HISI have revealed details that astonish, braided strands only a few hundred kilometers wide, weaving together like woven sunlight. These strands may combine and unravel, creating motion that stirs the entire layer. It is not turbulence but texture, a slow dance of threads. As our spacecraft draw closer, they find more layers within layers. The Parker Solar Probe, diving ever deeper into the sun's outer atmosphere, has flown through zones where particles no longer behave as one fluid but begin to separate into individual voices. Here the corona's whisper becomes personal. Each proton, each electron carries its own story, its own trajectory, its own response to the bending field. The closer we get, the more intimate it becomes. Less like studying a system, and more like reading a script written in warmth. And through all of this, the corona continues to change. Its shape responds to the sun's larger cycles. As the magnetic field reverses every 11 years, the corona rearranges. During solar minimum, it forms streamers and rays that follow the equator. During maximum, it erupts in all directions, a chaotic burst of loops and plumes. It is not one thing, but many. Not a layer, but a chorus. Let us hold this image as we drift once more through its strands, a crown made not of jewels, but of light. A layer shaped not by pressure, but by magnetism. A breath that holds heat, that loops back on itself, that releases wind into the dark. The corona is the place where sunlight remembers its shape before it becomes motion, where brightness curls around silence and chooses to stretch, to rise, to leave. So next time you see the halo during an eclipse, or catch an image of the sun glowing with coronal threads, think of the millions of tiny arcs that hold that shape. Think of the loops that rose from stillness. Think of the waves that ripple through silence. Think of the whispers of energy held so delicately, yet strong enough to shape the sky. The corona is not the sun's end, it is its gesture, its hand extended into the dark, fingers of light curling outward, shaping space not with force, but with form. Now let us return once more to the edge of the sun, where light stretches into silence and shape becomes the language of heat. We've seen the twisting loops of the corona, the soft pulses of the solar wind, the invisible hand of magnetism guiding every curve. But what happens next, as sunlight leaves this delicate architecture behind? What becomes of these whispers once they slip free from the crown? They do not vanish, they travel. They become the messengers of a star, carrying its memory across space in long, spiraling streams. What begins as a twist becomes a trail. What begins as a shimmer becomes a breath that reaches across the solar system. The corona, for all its grace and complexity, is not a boundary. It is a beginning. Its open magnetic fields serve as launch pads for solar wind, releasing particles into heliospace. These particles, protons, electrons, bits of the sun itself, travel outward in expanding waves. They fill the solar system with energy, forming the heliosphere, a vast bubble that wraps planets and shields us from interstellar radiation. This bubble is not solid, it is made of motion. The corona breathes it into being, one whisper at a time. As these solar whispers pass through space, they shape everything they touch. they bend comet tails, they stir the magnetospheres of planets, they sculpt the outer edges of our atmosphere. Sometimes they arrive as gentle streams, steady and soft. Sometimes they come as bursts, riding the shock fronts of solar storms. But always they carry the imprint of where they began, the texture of the corona, the memory of the loops and lines that shaped them. Even millions of kilometers away, that original twist remains. Here on Earth, we feel these whispers not with our skin, but through their influence. They spark auroras that shimmer across polar skies, painting the heavens in ribbons of green and red. They tickle the edges of radio signals, disrupt satellites, dance along power grids. We respond with science, with space weather forecasting, with instruments that monitor the solar wind, with spacecraft that feel the sun's breath before we do. But if we pause just for a moment, we might also respond with awe. That something born in silence, in a crown of light so far away, could reach us in such tangible ways. This is a wonder that no equation can fully express. The corona in its final gesture gives the sun a voice in space, not through sound but through presence. Its shape determines how sunlight stretches, how particles flow, how storms unfold. And like any voice, it changes with emotion, with rhythm, with time. During solar maximum, the corona speaks in broad, bold strokes, looping arcs, fast winds, explosive releases. During solar minimum, it grows more quiet, more structured, its streams smoother, its patterns more symmetrical. This is not silence or noise, it is expression, a star expressing itself across time. We used to think of the sun as a simple thing, a glowing ball, a furnace, a light in the sky. But the corona shows us that it is more than heat, it is harmony. Its motions are not wild but woven. Its heat is not spread evenly but sculpted. Its edge is not an end but a soft beginning. Every curve, every wave, every whisper of plasma that leaves its surface carries with it the shape of the sun's inner tides. Even now, as our spacecraft listen from within and beyond, we are only beginning to understand. The Parker Solar Probe continues its descent, flying closer and closer to the corona, feeling the heat and pulse of this upper atmosphere firsthand. Its instruments detect not only particles and fields, but the texture of flow, the sudden changes, the ripples, the waves. What we once imagined as smooth and uniform is now seen as rich and alive, full of structure and transition. The corona, once just a glow in eclipse, is becoming a living map. And it is a map that teaches us more than solar science. It teaches us about transition, about the nature of edges. The corona is an edge, but it is not a line. It is a space where things change slowly, where energy transforms from one state to another. It is not a wall between the sun and the solar system. It is a corridor, a threshold, a liminal space where identity shifts, where the heat of the star becomes the wind of the cosmos. We might even say that the corona reflects a truth we see elsewhere, that what is most powerful is not always where it is hottest or densest or brightest. Sometimes it is where things turn, where forces balance, where motion takes form. The corona whispering into space is the place where light becomes journey, where presence becomes message, where energy stops spinning in loops and begins to reach outward. This is where the sun touches the rest of the solar system, not with force but with grace, with a quiet, continuous breath that never stops. And in this breath there is rhythm, there is memory, there is something that feels strangely like peace. Even among the flares and the storms, there is a baseline hum, an endless exhale of warmth and pattern and time. So let this be your final image of the corona, not as fire but as a gesture, not as heat but as shape, a crown that does not weigh down the head of the sun but lifts from it in spirals of motion, a place where particles begin their long journey, where solar light begins to forget its origin and becomes story instead. And even though we may never stand there, never breathe its thin plasma or feel its heat directly, we live within its influence, we orbit through its whispers. We are held in its embrace. For every whisper that leaves the sun carries with it a piece of the whole, a memory of the core, a breath of the magnetic field, a shimmer from the loops above. And every beam of sunlight that warms your cheek began, in some gentle way, as a twist in this invisible crown, as a whisper shaped in gold. Beneath the flowing winds of the solar south, where the sun leans gently into the shadows of its own turn-in. There lies a force both invisible and immense, magnetism, drawn not with wires or sparks, but with lines of influence etched into the very body of the star. This is the southern hemisphere of the sun, quieter than the middle, slower than the flare-filled equator, and yet holding within it a hidden rhythm, a magnetic heart that beats beneath the blaze. From here, deep within the plasma sea, rise the fields that twist and fold, storing the sun's breath, shaping the storms, and guiding the whispers of light that wander into space. It is not flame that leads the dance, but the pattern beneath it. When we speak of the sun, we often describe its heat, its brightness, its bursts of energy that reach us across the vacuum. But less often do we speak of the magnetism, the invisible architecture that defines the movement of plasma and the shape of the sun's atmosphere. These magnetic fields are not anchored to solid ground, for there is no ground in the sun. Instead, they are carried by the motion of the plasma itself, forming loops and arcs that emerge from deep within the sun's layers and reach out into the corona. They stretch and bend, twist and tangle, always in motion, always changing. And in the sun's southern hemisphere, they follow a rhythm all their own. The sun's magnetic field is not a simple dipole like Earth's. It does not have a steady north and south pole locked in place. Instead, it is dynamic, reversing every 11 years in a slow magnetic flip. North becomes south, south becomes north, and in this cycle the southern hemisphere plays a special role. Often it begins to shift before the north. The sunspots in the south appear earlier. The active regions twist more tightly. It is as if the magnetic heart of the sun beats first on this lower side, sending the earliest signals of change before the rest of the star follows. This early awakening is not a coincidence. It may be tied to deeper flows within the sun's interior, where differential rotation and meridional currents carry magnetic fields toward the poles. The plasma here flows in great loops, up at the equator and down at the poles, carrying magnetic energy with it. This circulation is part of the solar dynamo, the process that generates the sun's magnetic field. And it is in the southern loop, beneath the polar crown, that the first hints of reversal often emerge. The fields weaken, the polarity shifts, a new cycle begins. When these shifts happen, they are not loud. They do not arrive with flares or flashes. Instead, they unfold slowly, with the quiet rise of sunspots and the gentle expansion of coronal holes. The southern coronal holes, in particular, grow large during the declining phase of the solar cycle, releasing fast streams of solar wind that extend into space. These winds do not explode. They flow, steady, persistent, born from open magnetic fields that stretch away from the sun like untied ribbons. It is here, in this outward breath, that we feel the southern fire, not as a burn but as a pulse. Spacecraft like the Solar Orbiter and the Ulysses probe have studied these southern regions, flying above and below the sun's equator to gather rare glimpses of its polar behavior. What they've seen confirms what models suggest, that the magnetic field in the south is more than just a mirror of the north. It has its own timing, its own strength, its own pattern of emergence. In some cycles it is stronger, in others it is more complex, but always it carries the seed of the next solar rhythm. This magnetic heart is not constant. It changes with each cycle. Scientists track the polar field's strength, using it to predict the strength of future solar activity. A strong southern field may lead to a stronger cycle ahead with more sunspots, more flares, more auroras lighting the skies of Earth. A weak field may signal a quieter time. These measurements are not exact, but they are meaningful. The sun's future is written in its southern flow. But the beauty of the southern magnetism is not only in prediction. It is in pattern, in watching how invisible forces shape visible form. The arcs of plasma that rise in the corona, the loops that brighten in X-rays, the spirals of solar wind, they all trace the lines of magnetic influence. And these lines begin below, drawn by the sun's slow rotation, by the convection of plasma, by the shearing of field lines across latitude. The southern hemisphere, turning slightly differently than the north, creates its own signature, its own geometry, its own kind of music. There is elegance in this asymmetry, in knowing that the sun, though seemingly a perfect sphere, is not uniform. Its poles behave differently, its hemispheres rise and fall at different times, and yet out of this imbalance comes rhythm, out of this difference a cycle. The magnetic heart does not beat in perfect symmetry, it beats in waves, in echoes, in spirals. Even the sunspots themselves, those dark blemishes that mark the surface, follow this rhythm. They appear first at mid-latitudes, then migrate toward the equator as the cycle progresses, forming a butterfly pattern when plotted over time. And the southern wing of this butterfly often appears first or grows faster. The spots themselves are magnetic structures, places where the field is so strong that it suppresses convection, cooling the surface. They are born of deep energy, shaped by the loops that twist through the southern interior. And when these sunspots cluster, when their fields tangle, they can erupt into flares. These flares may be sudden, but their roots are slow. The tension builds over days, the loops twist tighter, and then the energy is released in a flash of light and a surge of particles. But it began always in the magnetic memory of the southern fire, in the heart that beat quietly long before the storm. So as we watch the sun rise and fall, as we see its corona shimmer and its wind flow past, let us not forget the force beneath it all. The magnetism that shapes its every motion, the field that loops and coils and breathes through its layers. and especially the southern source, that quiet pole where the cycle begins anew, where whispers turn into wind, where the sun writes its future in lines we cannot see but can always feel. Let us now follow the lines of magnetic breath deeper into the southern hemisphere of the sun, where loops of plasma twist like threads in a loom, and where each curl and rise is a quiet signal of change. Beneath the patterns we see from space, beneath the glowing arcs and dark spots, there is a living current of energy shaped not by chaos, but by memory. The sun, though often described in terms of fire and heat, is more truly a creature of magnetism, and nowhere is this more evident than in the hidden order of the southern fields. They do not roar, they do not flash, they spiral, they evolve, they carry the signature of solar time, turning unseen gears that guide the entire cycle forward. The southern hemisphere has long been a region of curiosity for solar scientists. While both hemispheres contribute to the magnetic flip that occurs every 11 years, the south often leads the change. In many solar cycles, sunspot activity appears first in the southern latitudes, suggesting that the deeper magnetic processes might ignite there earlier. This difference is subtle but meaningful. It implies that the sun does not behave like a symmetrical machine. It behaves like a living system, with differences from side to side, top to bottom, differences that breathe, shift, and echo through space. Within the convection zone, where energy moves like slow waves of heat rising and falling, magnetic fields are carried along like driftwood on tides. The plasma itself is charged, and its movement generates and stretches magnetic lines. In the southern hemisphere, the flow of plasma is shaped by the sun's rotation, which is faster at the equator and slower at the poles. This differential rotation causes the field lines to wrap around the sun like ribbons winding on a spinning ball. The result is a buildup of magnetic tension, especially at the boundaries between different latitudes. Over time, these tensions stretch the field lines into loops that emerge at the surface. Some become sunspots, places of concentrated field strength where energy is trapped and the surface cools. Others grow into towering magnetic arches that support the corona, glowing with trapped plasma shaped by the forces that raised it. These structures are not isolated. They interact, they merge and reconnect. They shift with the ongoing flow beneath. And at the southern pole, where the field lines often stretch open into space, the magnetism becomes a doorway, an exit for particles, a birth point for solar wind. This polar wind is steady, fast, and strong. It flows not in bursts but in streams, carrying charged particles across the solar system. Though invisible to the naked eye, these streams are felt by every planet they touch. They influence space weather, stir magnetospheres, and shape the invisible bubble of the heliosphere. The strength of the polar fields, especially in the south, determines how much of this wind is released and how far it reaches. In years when the southern magnetic field is strong, the solar wind expands farther, sweeping past the outer planets. In years when the field is weak, the wind recedes and the sun's influence shrinks. The magnetic strength at the poles also affects how the field reverses. As the solar cycle progresses, the polarity of the magnetic field slowly weakens, collapses, and then flips. This process begins when new magnetic flux is carried to the poles by meridional flows, slow rivers of plasma that carry surface material from mid-latitudes toward the poles. When enough opposite polarity flux accumulates, it cancels out the old field and replaces it with the new. This change happens gradually, invisibly, like the turning of a season. And again. The south often flips first, its magnetic heart shifting before the north responds. These transitions are recorded in the sun's outer layers. In the corona, the shape of streamers and loops shifts with the changing polarity. Coronal holes appear and vanish, tracing the underlying field. And in the solar wind, the magnetic sectors, the orientation of the field as it reaches Earth, alternate in a pattern that matches the sun's invisible change. This pattern is known as the heliospheric current sheet, a wavy surface that spirals out from the sun, separating regions of opposite polarity. It is shaped by the sun's magnetic field, and it too bends in response to the southern heart. When we measure these changes from afar, using satellites and observatories, we begin to see the sun not as a single light, but as a layered world, each layer shaped by deeper motions. The surface flickers, the corona glows, but the roots of this movement are magnetic and they stretch far below. The field that emerges in the south is a kind of message, shaped by flows we cannot see, driven by a memory we are only beginning to understand. We now know that the sun's interior holds more than one kind of flow. There are rotation patterns that vary with depth. There are circulations that change with latitude. These flows interact, combining and separating like currents in an ocean. And within these flows, the magnetic field is carried, twisted, and regenerated. The dynamo that powers all of this is not a machine in the mechanical sense. It is a feedback loop, a living system of motion and memory. And the southern hemisphere, through its early activity and stronger polarity, seems to be one of the key players in this endless rhythm. Solar physicists track these processes through heliosysmology, watching how pressure waves travel through the sun's body. They model the field with data from solar observatories, comparing each cycle to the ones before it. And still, the mystery remains. Why does the south so often lead? What lies within that magnetic heart that causes it to stir before the rest? Perhaps it is a quirk of fluid dynamics. Perhaps it is a deeper asymmetry in the sun's structure. Or perhaps it is a pattern we have not yet fully seen, waiting for us to understand. But even without full knowledge, we can feel its importance. The southern fire is not the brightest, it is not the loudest, but it is steady, it is early, it is the whisper that begins the wave. And when we look back at the long history of solar cycles, we find its trace again and again, guiding the field, shaping the wind, whispering the next turn. So let us imagine for a moment standing in orbit above that polar crown, not within the fire but beside it, watching the magnetic lines unfurl like threads of silk into space, listening not with ears but with the quiet attention that sees pattern in motion. Beneath us the heart beats. It does not shout, it turns. Now let us drift into the final curves of this magnetic journey, returning once more to the southern expanse of the sun where light coils and memory moves in spirals. The heart of the southern fire does not beat in rhythm with sound, nor does it pulse in time with the ticking of any clock we know. It turns in solar time, slow and vast, guided by the push and pull of plasma and field. It remembers more than any single flare or storm. It holds the shape of the sun's seasons. It carries the blueprint of every reversal, every rise and fall in activity, every arc that ever danced along the edge of space. The magnetic heart is not a place. It is a process, a soft, endless transformation. At the end of each solar cycle, when the loops begin to settle and the sunspots dwindle, we see the southern hemisphere quiet again. But this quiet is not emptiness. It is gathering. It is the calm before a new field begins to grow. Opposite polarity flux, brought by slow currents, reaches the pole and begins to cancel what came before. The older field fades and the seed of the next is planted. During this time, the southern coronal hole grows wide, releasing strong, steady solar wind that flows far into space. And though we may see fewer flares, the field is not weak. It is shifting, setting the stage for what is to come. In this period of reversal, the magnetic current that shapes the entire solar system bends with the sun's turning. The heliospheric current sheet, once tilted and wide, begins to flatten. The sectors of magnetic polarity shift. The shape of space itself begins to change, responding to a star that is remaking its own breath. Earth, caught within this vast magnetic spiral, feels the difference. Not as heat or brightness, but as subtle changes in space weather, in the direction of incoming particles, in the dance of auroras along polar skies. It is the sun's quiet message, arriving not in seconds but in cycles. And through it all, the southern magnetic field continues its silent work. It does not flare like the equator, it does not twist like the mid-latitudes, but it holds the foundation. It determines the strength of the next cycle. It balances the sun's great reversal. And perhaps more beautifully, it teaches us about patience, about invisible structure, about the way something can be powerful without being loud. The sun's southern magnetism does not announce itself. It reveals itself in outcomes, in the shape of wind, in the tilt of the current sheet, in the number of sunspots that rise in the following years. Solar researchers look now to the southern pole as a kind of early indicator, a compass not of direction but of time. They watch for changes in field strength, for the growth of opposite polarity flux, for the expansion or decay of polar coronal holes. These are signs, quiet but important, that show where the sun is headed next. And in the heart of those signs is magnetism, lines without color, paths without texture, yet strong enough to guide entire oceans of plasma across the sky. When we consider the sun's influence, we often focus on the surface, on the corona, on the flares and filaments, but all of these rise from what is buried. The roots lie in the magnetic engine, and that engine is driven in part by the flow at the poles, especially in the south, where activity often begins before it is seen elsewhere. The magnetism here is not fixed, it is forged. In the slow churn of the convection zone, in the differential rotation of latitudes, in the rise and fall of long meridional flows, it is a pulse of structure beneath a body of fire. And though we are far from understanding it completely, we know enough to say this: the magnetic heart of the southern fire matters. It is not just a curiosity, it is not an afterthought. It is the hinge on which the solar cycle swings, the quiet clock beneath the storm, the unseen composer of the sun's most graceful patterns. We've sent spacecraft to glimpse this region more clearly. The solar orbiter in particular is set to increase its orbital tilt, giving us our best view yet of the sun's poles. With each pass, it sends back more data, maps of the magnetic field, snapshots of the polar corona, measurements of solar wind flow. It helps us build a picture, one detail at a time, of what lies at the magnetic roots of our star. And though the images are partial, the picture grows clearer. The southern pole is a well of potential, a region of deep importance, a heart beneath the heat. So when you look up into the sky and see the steady glow of daylight, or when you feel the warmth on your skin, remember that you are not just touched by photons. You are touched by magnetism, by the memory of loops that began far below, by fields that rose from the depths and spread across the corona, by the pulse of a cycle that began in the silent south. You are living in the sunlight of structure, in the warmth of a field that twisted its way outward from the heart of a star. The southern fire does not rage, it guides, it anchors, it turns the tide of time across the face of the sun, and though it leaves no mark we can see with our eyes, its influence shapes everything that comes after. It is not dramatic, it is enduring, a quiet promise that the sun will turn again, that light will rise again, that fire, guided by memory, will always find its way into space. Let this be our final reflection, that beneath the dance of heat and the flash of storms lies something more tender, more structured, more constant. A magnetic heart beating in plasma, turning in silence, carving the shape of light from the dark. There are places on the sun where time moves not in lines, but in circles. At the poles of this massive star, those distant, elusive regions above and below the plane of planets, motion bends differently. Here the sun does not roar, it turns, it leans into its own rotation. It traces great loops that begin and end within themselves, winding again and again through magnetic change and quiet flow. These polar regions are not chaotic like the equator. They are quieter, steadier, and yet they carry the rhythm of the entire star. To observe them is to witness a kind of balance, a dance that spins without ceasing, without haste, without end. The poles of the sun are difficult to see. From Earth's orbit, we are forever stuck in the sun's equatorial plane, gazing at its middle where the action seems brightest. But this perspective leaves the poles shrouded in mystery. For decades, they remained hidden, tilted away, unfocused, wrapped in guesswork and inference. Only in recent years have we begun to glimpse them clearly, thanks to missions like Ulysses and Solar Orbiter, whose paths lift above the equator and tilt toward the sun's secret crowns. And what we see there is not emptiness, but pattern. At the solar poles, the magnetic field opens. Unlike at the equator, where loops curve back into the surface, the poles are dominated by unipolar fields that stretch straight into space. These open fields allow solar wind to escape freely, creating the fast streams that shape the outer solar system. From the southern and northern tips, the sun exhales continuously, not in bursts but in long, steady flows. These polar winds are colder, less dense but faster. They are the breath of the sun's balance, less turbulent, more regular, rising like sighs that have no need for drama. And yet beneath this apparent calm, something remarkable is always happening. The poles are not fixed, they shift. Their magnetic polarity reverses every 11 years, flipping north to south and back again in perfect correspondence with the solar cycle. This flip does not happen with fire or explosion. It unfolds gradually over months as opposite polarity magnetic flux is carried poleward by plasma flows. These flows, called meridional flows, are like slow rivers moving along the surface of the sun, ferrying magnetic seeds from lower latitudes to the poles. When enough opposite polarity flux gathers, the field collapses and reverses. This process is the engine of the solar dynamo, and it begins and ends at the poles. The reversal is not simultaneous across the sun. Often one pole flips before the other, sometimes by weeks, sometimes by months. This asymmetry adds a gentle twist to the cycle, a reminder that even a star's most regular rhythm can carry variation. And yet the overall pattern holds. One pole changes, then the other. The field weakens, then regrows. A new cycle begins. In this slow turning there is grace. Imagine a dance where each step is measured not in seconds but in years, where the partners do not touch but influence each other across vast distances. The sun's polar dance is like this, slow, magnetic, unfolding across time. It does not spin for us. It spins for itself, with a rhythm so old that it predates memory. Each circle completed is not a return to sameness but an evolution. A spiral that widens with each turn, teaching the sun to be something just a little different than before. The visible signs of this dance appear in the movement of sunspots. Each new cycle begins with small spots at mid-latitudes, which then migrate toward the equator. At the same time, the poles undergo their reversal. When the field is fully flipped, the spots begin their journey anew, moving in the opposite magnetic direction. This dance of sunspots and poles is recorded in diagrams that look like butterflies, broad wings of activity narrowing toward the cycle's midpoint, then opening again in reverse. But beneath the wings is the turning. Always the poles are shifting. Always the magnetic circles are closing and reopening. The poles also influence the shape of the corona. During solar minimum, when activity is low, the corona appears more organized, streamers near the equator, open fields at the poles. But during maximum, when the field is reversing, the corona becomes wild. Loops emerge in all directions. The structure bends and curls unpredictably. The symmetry is lost. The dance becomes more elaborate. But when the flip is complete, order begins to return. The corona settles. The new field takes hold. And the poles begin again. This is not just a rhythm of the sun. It is a rhythm that touches all of us. The polar wind that escapes these regions shapes the heliosphere, the vast magnetic bubble that shields our solar system from interstellar radiation. As the poles shift, so does the heliosphere's shape. It expands and contracts, it wobbles, it breathes. And Earth, caught within this field, feels its movement, not through light or heat, but through magnetism, through changes in cosmic ray intensity, through shifts in auroral activity. We are dancing too, pulled gently by the sun's quiet turn. Even our understanding of space weather begins at the poles. The strength of the polar fields at solar minimum is one of the best predictors of how active the next cycle will be. A strong polar field means a stronger solar cycle ahead, with more flares, more storms. A weak field suggests quiet years to come. Scientists now monitor the poles closely, watching for hints of the next reversal, the next breath of magnetic change. These measurements are not dramatic, they are slow, they are soft. But they hold the shape of tomorrow. So let us imagine now what it would feel like to float above the sun's pole, watching the loops of magnetism rise and fall, seeing the wind slip silently into space. It would not be fiery, it would not be loud. It would be like drifting through a field of motion, fluid, invisible, alive. Beneath you, the field would be turning, changing polarity without a sound. Around you, the corona would shimmer faintly, a veil of energy stretching into space. And in your silence, you would feel the sun's rotation, not its spin, but its meaning, a turning that guides the pulse of stars. This is the sun's polar dance. It is not a performance. It is not for show. It is simply the way the star remembers itself, through reversa. LS through rhythms, through circles that never end. If we listen carefully to the turning of the sun's polar regions, we begin to realize that this gentle motion is not only a pattern of the present, but also a memory of the past. The circles traced by the sun's magnetic fields are not just movements, they are cycles of renewal, echoing through time like waves that return to the shore in slightly different ways. Each magnetic flip, each reversal at the poles, is both a conclusion and a beginning. And in that quiet switch, the sun writes its own history in loops of invisible force. These circles, though intangible, shape not only the sun but the space between all planets. They shape the quiet emptiness we drift through and call space, making it less empty than we thought. Solar physicists have come to understand that these polar fields serve as magnetic memory banks. Like deep roots beneath a forest, they hold the potential for all that blooms above. When sunspots erupt at mid-latitudes, it is because the deep magnetic flows have risen. When the corona bursts outward in flares or ejects mass toward Earth, it is the built-up pressure of fields formed long ago, fields carried by plasma that once curled near the poles. In this way, what begins as a whisper in the polar crown can become a storm that lashes at satellites and shimmers across the Arctic sky. Time moves forward, but its origin lies behind us, in the last loop, the last flip, the last polar breath. And still the sun keeps circling. The meridional flows, those slow surface currents, carry magnetic fields from the active latitudes toward the poles. These fields accumulate layer upon layer until they cancel the existing polarity and allow a new one to grow. The process is subtle. A field does not vanish in an instant. It is eroded, balanced, and slowly undone. And then, almost imperceptibly, a new field takes its place, pointing in the opposite direction. This moment of reversal is not one of silence, it is one of balance. A perfect pause in the rhythm, like the breath held between inhale and exhale. During these reversals, the sun's magnetic structure becomes more complex. Field lines tangle. The corona appears less ordered. Solar wind streams bend. And yet, out of this brief chaos, a new simplicity is born. The field lines reorganize, the polar holes reform, the new field strengthens. The memory of the last cycle becomes the root of the next. This regenerative dance is not dramatic, it is graceful. And it speaks to a truth found not only in stars but in forests, in tides, in sleep and waking. The truth that cycles bring growth, that endings make room for beginnings, that turning is a way of remembering. As the sun's poles change, they shape the entire heliosphere. This vast magnetic bubble, blown outward by the solar wind, changes with the poles. When the polar fields are strong, the heliosphere expands, offering more protection from interstellar radiation. When they weaken, it contracts. Cosmic rays, high-energy particles from beyond our solar system, increase during these quiet times, reaching Earth in higher numbers. In this way, even distant galaxies are part of the sun's magnetic breath. The pole turns, the bubble shifts, and Earth, nestled inside, feels both the shield and the shimmer of space. One of the more poetic aspects of this polar dance is its longevity. For thousands of cycles, millions of years, the sun has flipped its fields, built its memory, and guided the wind that reaches us. Though we have only measured these reversals for a few decades, we know from ice cores and geological records that Earth's climate, radiation levels, and even auroral activity have followed the rhythm of the sun's turning. The circles it traces at the poles echo across time, leaving quiet marks in tree rings and deep-sea sediment. These are the footprints of a rhythm too vast to see in a single lifetime, but too steady to ignore. And now we are watching more closely. Missions like the Parker Solar Probe and the Solar Orbiter are not only measuring solar flares or sunspots, they are mapping the magnetic fields near the poles, tracing the motion of plasma flows, and observing how the corona evolves during the cycle's transition. From these glimpses, we are beginning to piece together a clearer image of the sun's polar heart. The hope is not only to understand the sun's past, but to predict its future. When the next reversal will occur, how strong the next cycle might be, and how it may affect our planet. What we learn is both comforting and humbling. The sun does not rush, it does not panic, it does not forget, it simply turns, and in that turning it transforms. The poles do not resist change, they become it. They let go of one magnetic identity and embrace the next, quietly, without fanfare. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the kind of strength that comes from rhythm, from flow, from understanding that to change is to survive and to return is to grow. Even our own human rhythms mirror this. We sleep and wake, we inhale and exhale, we rise and rest. The heart beats in loops. The breath returns again and again, our planet spins and circles the sun. The moon traces its arc, repeating its phases. These loops are not traps, they are freedom. They allow change without loss, they offer the promise of renewal. And the sun, greatest of all these circles, teaches us that nothing remains still, but everything in its time returns. So the next time you feel sunlight on your face, remember the pole. Remember the quiet movement of magnetic fields drifting slowly from equator to crown, the silent flip that resets the sun's memory, the wind that flows freely from the polar gates. You are feeling the result of circles too large to see. You are standing in the warmth of cycles that never end. This is the beauty of the polar dance, not in its fire but in its form, not in its power but in its patience. The sun, in its turning, invites us to listen, to learn, and to find comfort in motion that has no beginning and no end. Now let us descend softly toward the close of this solar rhythm, where the final turns of the polar dance unfold with the grace of something eternal. We've drifted above the sun's poles, followed the quiet reversal of its fields, and traced the slow migration of magnetism from the active belts to the calm crowns. But here, as the cycle prepares to renew itself once again, there is something more to notice, something less about science and more about understanding. For in the circles that never end, we glimpse a shape of nature that soothes, a rhythm that reassures, a lesson that lives within the loops. The magnetic reversal, so central to the sun's identity, does not end with the flip. It begins again. As the new polarity strengthens, the solar wind reorders itself. The heliospheric current sheet, once twisted and wide, begins to flatten. The coronal holes at the poles grow clearer, more open, releasing fast solar wind that breathes stability into the system. These changes ripple outward, gently shaping the entire space around us. And even though Earth sits millions of kilometers away, we are not untouched. We are caught within the new breath, the reorganized light, the quiet exhale of a new solar chapter. This moment just after the flip, when the new magnetic identity takes hold, is one of clarity. It's like the stillness that follows a long storm, not empty but refreshed. During this time, sunspots begin appearing at new latitudes with reversed polarity. They mark the start of the new cycle's journey toward the equator. Meanwhile, the poles, having shed their old alignment, begin to rebuild their fields slowly, line by line, through the accumulation of magnetic flow from lower latitudes. It is the early stage of a new memory, written with the softest hand, a magnetic lullaby. As this rebuilding unfolds, we notice another wonder. Symmetry slowly returns. During solar maximum, when the poles are reversing, the corona becomes chaotic, loops erupting in all directions, polarities tangled, the heliosphere warping like a flag in wind. But after the flip, structure reemerges, streamers settle. The magnetic field begins to reorient into its more ordered dipolar form. The corona spreads evenly once more, with equatorial loops and polar openness. It's as if the sun, having turned inward for change, now opens outward with grace. This rhythm, wildness then order, is part of the great dance. And yet there's always a slight difference between the poles. Sometimes the north flips first, sometimes the south, sometimes the field rebuilds unevenly. This asymmetry is not imperfection, it's complexity. It reminds us that even within deep rhythms, no two cycles are identical, no two reversals unfold the same. The circles repeat, but they do not copy. They spiral, each one a little further, a little wiser, a little more intricate than the last. This is how living systems grow, not by returning to where they began, but by orbiting that beginning with deeper knowledge. In recent solar cycles, the polar asymmetry has grown more noticeable. The strength of the magnetic fields at each pole varies. The timing of their reversals diverges slightly. Scientists are watching this with curiosity, for it may hold clues about the long-term evolution of the solar dynamo. Could these differences signal a deeper cycle, a centuries-long pulse beneath the 11-year rhythm, perhaps? The Maunder minimum, a time when sunspots nearly vanished for decades, might have roots in such deep polar processes. And so, by observing today's circles, we begin to read echoes of tomorrow. Even more profound is the realization that this dance, so ancient and persistent, is not unique to our sun. Other stars flip their magnetic fields too. Other stellar dynamos turn with their own cycles. Astronomers observe these reversals in faraway suns, watching the brightness rise and fall, watching star spots emerge and fade. These patterns, though distant, mirror our own. It suggests that the polar dance is not a quirk of our star, it is a universal language, a rhythm written in plasma and field, in fusion and flow, a cosmic heartbeat. Back on Earth, we continue to listen. We build instruments that can detect the sun's magnetic fields from afar. We launch missions that peek over its equator. We model the flows beneath the surface, the hidden rivers that drive the dynamo. And with every observation, every map, every graph of polarity and wind, we grow closer to a fuller picture, not just of what the sun is doing, but of what it is becoming. For that is what the polar cycle truly reveals, not only the present shape of the star, but its path, its direction, its slow, turning transformation. And in that transformation there is comfort, because while so much of the cosmos feels distant or chaotic, the sun gives us something else, a dependable cycle, a returning arc, a pattern we can follow. When the world below feels rushed, the sun reminds us to turn slowly. When days feel fractured, its circles offer cohesion. When we lose the thread of continuity, the solar dance restores it. The poles flip, but they do not fall. The field reverses, but the light returns. The sun turns, and through it, we find our center again. So let us end this story as gently as it began, not with a flare or a storm, but with a turn. Imagine the sun from afar, its body golden and whole, its poles quietly changing. Picture the magnetic field like a ribbon of breath, rising from crown to crown, arching outward and curving back. Hear the faint music of plasma flowing through deep time. And see yourself within that rhythm, not separate, but included. Not just a passenger in space, but a participant in the turning. For in every sunrise is a reminder of reversal. In every soft wind is a hint of the poles. In every warm day is the whisper of a cycle that began in silence, high above, in a place we barely see but always feel. This is the sun's polar dance, a circle that does not end, a rhythm that always returns, a memory carried forward, one loop at a time.